Hi there, and welcome back to Sky Skill Hub Introduction to CSS course. And in this lesson, we'll learn how to build a Facebook login page. You can see that this login page is styled. It has this blue color on this text that says Facebook. We have two input forms. We have a button. We have a link just in case you forgot your account. And we have a button here if you want to create a new account. So let's go over to our VS Code and let's build it together. I will first of all create the folder that I'll be working with. So I'll create a new folder and call it Facebook login page. So when I create that folder, all I need to do is to go to this file tab at this section, click on it, click on open folder, then I go straight to my desktop. It opens this folder for us in VS Code. So I can come in here and right in this section, I will also create a new file. I'm going to create my HTML file. And I'm going to create my CSS file. So in this project, we're going to build a Facebook login clone. As you can see right here, you can see that we have an input field right here and a login button. And just in case you haven't logged in or you don't have an account, you can come right here and create a new account. So this is one that we are going to build. This has the Facebook image right here or text. I made use of text in this section. Then we have our login form and we have our login button and forgotten password just in case you have forgotten your password, and we have a create new account button. I will first and foremost start by creating my doc type, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the HTML element, and right in between the HTML element I will create the head element, and below the head element I am going to create the body element. In between the head element I am going to create another element which is called the title element, and right in between the title element I would write a text that says Facebook login page. So after that I'm going to create a link element, because this link element is what I'm going to use to link my external CSS file to this HTML file. So I'll give it a property, an href property, then I'll link this page to my CSS page that I created. Now that we have created the document structure of our HTML element, the next thing we need to do is to create our CSS file. So I'll come in here and create our file, give it a name called style.css. So I'll click on enter and we have created that CSS file. Now that I've created it, I'll go back to my HTML file and I'll start creating my HTML element. So I'll first of all start by adding the div element, and right in between that div element I will add another div element. So after I've created this div, I'm going to create another div right inside of it. So this div, I am going to give it a class of, then inside this div I'm going to create a heading and I'll type a content that says Facebook right in between. Then below that I am going to create another div, and this div will have a class of form container. So this div is going to be our form. So inside of it I would create a paragraph element and say login to Facebook. So below the paragraph element I will create an input element and I'll give that input element a type of text. I will also give it a placeholder of email or phone number. I will also create another input element for the password. So I'll give this input element a type of password and I'll give it a placeholder of password. So below this input element, I am going to create a button. So this button is going to be our login button. And after this button, I will create another element which is going to be our div element. So this div element is going to be holding the anchor element and another div element. So I'll come in here and I'll write all. And in between this anchor element, I will write a text that says forgotten account. Then below this div element, I'll create a button and I'll write a text in between that button that says create new account. So this is our HTML. And when I save my code and click on go live, you can see the result of everything that I've coded so far. So you can see that we have our input form. You can see that we have our password input. You can see that we have our login button and our create new accounts button. So up next, I'll be going over to my CSS and I'll try to style my HTML to make it look more presentable. So first, I'm going to start with my universal selector. I'm going to give that element a padding of 0, a margin of 0, and a box sizing of border box. So this universal selector selects every element and add these styles to those elements. Moving on, I'll be styling the body element. So I'll be giving the body a background color of FO, F to F5. And I'll give it a color of 1C1E, 21. So now that I've set up my background color and the color that I'm going to use for my button, now I'm going to style this div element right here. I'm going to style this div element right here, and I'm going to give it a class. So first, I'm going to style this div element right here. And I'm going to give it a class of main. So I'll come over to my CSS and say dot main. Now that I've selected it, I'll give it a height of 90 view height. I'll give it a width of 100 view width. I'll position this, I'll give it a relative position. And I'll give it a margin of 0, top and bottom, and also left and right. So once I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see that we applied some changes. You can see changes, even though they are not very clear, you can still see some small changes. And the next section I'm going to style would be this div element right here. So I'll give this element a class of row. Then I'll give it a class of row. Then after that, I'll go straight to my CSS. And directly in my CSS, I will select that element with this class name and I'll give it a display of flex. I will justify the content. I'll give a space around. Then I'll align the items to be center. I'll give it a width of 100%. Then I'll give it a maximum width of 1000 pixels. Then after that, I'll position this. I'll make it an absolute positioning. Then I will place it on the left side, of the parent element by 50%. Then I'll place it on the top side by 50%. So when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see some change that has happened already. So this that was right here moves straight to this section. So to properly position this very well, I'm going to move this element given the x-axis -50 and the y -50. So when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see the change that has occurred. Moving on, I'll be starting up the next section of our code, which is this. So when I go straight to my CSS section, I'm going to come over to that section and type code-form. So code-form, then I would assign some properties to it. So I'll align this text to the center by using the text align property. So align any text to the center. So when I go to my browser, you can see that the text has been aligned to the center. So moving on, I'll be styling this heading element. So to style the heading element, I'm going to select the element first of all, and I'll give it a font width. Then below that, I will give this element a padding of 0 pixels top and bottom and 30 pixels left and right. And after that, I'm going to give this element a line height of 32. A line height of 32 pixels. Then after that, I'm going to give the element a font size of 40 pixels. From there, I will give it a margin. Then after the margin, I'm going to assign a color to this element. Now moving on, I'll be styling this form container. And to style the form container, I'll go over to my CSS. Now I'm going to give it a background color of white. Then below that, I'm going to remove all the borders. Then after that, I am going to give my element some curve borders. So 8 pixels. I'm going to make the element a little bit curved. I'm going to add a shadow to this element. So I'll make it 0, 2 pixels, 4 pixels, RGBA 0, 0, 0, pixels, 16 pixels, 0, 0, 0.1. So now that I've added a shadow to this form container, the next thing I'm going to do is to add a margin to the bottom of that element. So I'm going to say margin bottom 30 pixels. Then I'm going to give this element a padding of 20 pixels, and I'll give it a width of 400 pixels. So when I save my code, you can see the change that has occurred in our browser. So when I go back to my VS Code, the next thing I'm going to style is going to be the paragraph element. I'll give it a padding of 24 pixels, and I'll give it a font size of 18 pixels. Then the next thing I'm going to style is going to be the input element. So the next thing I'm going to style is going to be my input element. I'm going to give it a width of 100%. I'll give it a margin of 5%, top and bottom, 0% left and right. I'll give it a height of 45%, and I'll add another property. Then I'll give the font size of 16 pixels. This style right here is the style that I'm going to add to another element. So I'm going to add this style also to my button. So just in case when I start building my button, I'm going to add this style to my button later on. Now moving on, I will add more styles to my input element. So this is basically just for my input element. So I'm going to give it a border of 1 pixels solid. So I added the button here because I want this style to be accepted by two elements. I want it to be accepted by the input element and also by the button element. I'll create another style for just my input element. So I'm going to give this input element a border of 1 pixel solid DD. And after that, I'm going to give it a color. Then below that, I'll add a padding and I'll give it an outline. Then after that, I'm going to create the input element in a focus state. So what I'll do right here is I'll give it a border color. Then after that, I'm going to give it a box shadow. Then below this, I would create some styles for my button. I'll give my button a background color. Then I am also going to remove the border of my button. Then after that, I'm going to give this button a border radius of 6 pixels. And I would give this a font size of 20 pixels. So below that, I'm going to add a padding, and after the padding, I would give it a color and a font width to make the text very bold. So let me show you everything that I've coded so far. So when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see everything that we've coded so far. So this is for the focus states. You can see that when I click on this input field, you can see the borders around the input. we are currently focused on this input. So once I go back to my CSS file, the next thing I'm going to style will be this anchor element. So to style the anchor element, I'll first and foremost select the element by its tag. Then I'll give it a display of block. Then below that, I'll give it a color. And after specifying the color that I'm going to add, I would also give it a font size of 14 pixels. Then below that, I would give it a text decoration of none. And after that, I'll give the element a padding of 10 pixels to 0 and 20 pixels. So I will come over here to this section and place this element border bottom of 1.5 pixels solid. Then I'm going to style the anchor element in a hover state. So to style the anchor element in a hover state, I'll just place a text decoration of underline. So when I save my code and go to my browser, you can see the change that we have made. So let me reduce this. You can see the change that we have made so far. Now, for the button, we must have styled the button. Okay, I guess we haven't add the class name. So btn dash login. So when I save my code, you can see that the style of the button has been added. So the next thing I'm going to style is going to be this button when users create a new account. So I will come here and give it a class of btn new. Then I'll go to my CSS, and at the last section, I'm going to select that element and give that element a background color. And after giving it a background color, I'm going to remove the border. And after that, I'll make the element curve. So I'll give it border radius 6 pixels. And I'll give the element a font size of 17 pixels. Then below that, I'll give the element a line height of 48 pixels. I'll add in some padding to placing some spaces directly inside that element. Now give that element a white color. Next, I would want to make the color of the text very bold. So I'm going to give it font width of 700. Then I'm going to add some spacings above the button element. So I'm going to give it margin top of 20 pixels. So when I save my code and I will save my HTML code, when I go straight to my browser, you can see the change that we have made. You can see the style that we added to this element right here. So the next thing I want to do is go straight to my body and add the font family property. So I would come here and add a font family to change the font. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to design this section in a way that is going to look presentable. So first and foremost, I'll go straight to my VS Code, and directly in my VS Code, I would look for the element that I want to style. So this is the element I want to style. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to give this element a class of forget account container. Then I'm going to give this div a class of all. Okay, so once I save it and go straight to my CSS, I would then add in my CSS, I would style the forget account container, and I will give it a relative position. So below that, I am going to style the or element. So the element with a class of or, and I'll give that an absolute position. Okay, so I'm going to place it 75 pixels from the top, 75% from the top. Then I'll place it 45% from the left. So once I save my code and show you, you can see the change that we've made right here. Now moving on, what I would do next is I would give this element a background color of FFF, that's for white. I'm going to give the element a padding right of 10 pixels. I'm also going to give it a padding left of 10 pixels. So once I save my code, you can see the change that I've made right here. Now to make this text a lot more smaller, I could come here and give it a font size property. So I will come here, give the font size of 14 pixels. So I've successfully created our Facebook login page. As you can see, it's a very simple login page. You can click on the login. So we'll have this section for forgotten accounts. Then this button to create a new account. So we have successfully built our Facebook login page with few lines of code. So thanks for watching.